There is a woman in Kyoto who spends 40 minutes a week planning her meals, 20 minutes on Sunday preparing the foundation of everything she will eat that week, and less money on food per month than her colleagues spend on takeaway in a single week. She does not consider herself a good cook. She has no culinary training, no interest in food media, no collection of cookbooks. She considers herself someone who understands 6 things about a kitchen that most people were never taught. 6 things that have nothing to do with skill and everything to do with structure. And the structure produces a result that looks, from the outside, like the kind of trade-off nobody is supposed to be able to make. Less time, less money, better food. Most people have been taught that these 3 things trade against each other. Fast food is quick and cheap but not healthy. Healthy food takes time and costs more. Cooking from scratch is virtuous but exhausting, and the exhaustion is usually why the takeaway app gets opened by Wednesday. The equation seems fixed. Pick 2, sacrifice the 3rd. And somewhere else right now, someone is standing in their kitchen at 6:40 in the evening, staring into a refrigerator that contains several partial ingredients and no complete meal, calculating whether cooking from what is available is worth the effort compared to the 15 minutes it will take a delivery app to solve the problem for considerably more money and considerably less nutrition. This calculation happens most evenings. It happens because the kitchen was never given the structure that would have made the calculation unnecessary. What if the trade-off between time, money, and health is not actually fixed? What if it only feels fixed because of a specific set of habits that most Western kitchens have never adopted, and that Japan has been quietly practicing, not as a discipline, but as the ordinary structure of an ordinary kitchen, for generations? By the end of this video, you will know exactly what all 6 habits are. And habit number 3, the one that on its own eliminates the single most expensive and most common failure point in a Western kitchen, is the one most people tell me changed their relationship with cooking more than any other single thing on this list. Stay with me, because the final habit is the one that makes the other 5 sustainable rather than another thing to fail at. Before we get into the 6 habits, there is a concept worth understanding, because it explains why the Japanese kitchen does not experience the trade-off that most Western kitchens treat as unavoidable. Ichiju sansai, 1 soup, 3 dishes, is the structural principle behind the traditional Japanese meal. Not a recipe, a structure. Rice, a soup, and 3 small dishes, each one simple, each one prepared quickly, together producing a complete and nutritionally balanced meal. The principle is not about the specific dishes. It is about the format, a small number of simple components rather than one large, complex dish that requires extensive technique, extensive time, and extensive cleanup. Most Western home cooking pursues the opposite model, the single complex dish, the one-pot meal elevated into an event, the recipe with 14 ingredients and 45 minutes of active preparation. The complexity is not a failure of choice. It is what most recipe media has trained people to consider cooking, and complexity is expensive in every currency that matters: time, decision-making energy, and the specialized ingredients that are used once and then occupy the refrigerator until they expire. The 6 habits below are not recipes. They are the structural conditions, the Ichiju sansai logic applied across the whole kitchen, that make Japanese home cooking simultaneously fast, cheap, and nutritionally dense, without any of the 3 coming at the expense of the others. The first habit addresses the cost side of the equation most directly, and it is the one Western shoppers most consistently violate without realizing it. Shun is the principle of seasonality, eating what is currently, locally at its peak. Not as a romantic culinary philosophy, but as an economic and nutritional one. A vegetable at the peak of its season is abundant, which makes it cheap. It has traveled a shorter distance and been stored for less time, which means it retains more of its nutritional content. And because it is genuinely ready to be eaten, it requires less preparation to taste good. A ripe seasonal tomato needs almost nothing done to it. An out-of-season one needs sauce, seasoning, and technique to compensate for what the vegetable itself is not providing. Consider the difference in practical terms. A tomato purchased in August, grown within a reasonable distance and harvested at ripeness, costs a fraction of a tomato purchased in February, which has typically traveled thousands of miles, been picked before ripeness to survive transport, and been ripened artificially with ethylene gas rather than on the vine. The August tomato needs salt and perhaps olive oil. The February tomato needs to be cooked into something else entirely to be palatable. An additional layer of technique, time, and often additional ingredients required simply to compensate for what the vegetable itself failed to provide. Economic research on seasonal food pricing is consistent across markets. In-season produce costs on average 40 to 60% less than the same item purchased out of season, when the out-of-season version is even available. The premium exists because out-of-season produce requires greenhouse cultivation, long-distance transport, or extended cold storage, costs that are passed directly to the consumer. The nutritional research is equally consistent. A study published in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry found that vitamin C content in vegetables can decline by up to 50% within a week of harvest when not eaten fresh, and that produce grown and consumed in season retains significantly higher levels of key micronutrients than the same produce forced out of season or stored for extended periods. She does not follow a rigid seasonal calendar. She simply buys what looks best and costs least at the market that week, and lets that determine the meals rather than deciding on meals first and shopping to match a preconceived recipe. The recipe follows the produce, not the other way around. The second habit is the one that eliminates the specific evening scenario described at the beginning of this video. On Sunday, or whichever day functions as the household's slower day, she spends 20 minutes preparing what Japanese home cooking calls the foundation, not full meals, but the base components that every meal that week will draw from. Rice cooked and portioned. Dashi, the foundational stock used in nearly every savory Japanese dish, made and refrigerated. Vegetables washed, trimmed, and stored in a state that is one step away from cooking, rather than several steps away. The dashi itself takes under 10 minutes. Kombu seaweed steeped in water, brought just to the point before boiling, bonito flakes added and removed within seconds. The resulting stock keeps for a week refrigerated and forms the base of soups, braises, and sauces that would each, made individually from scratch on a weeknight, require this same 10-minute step repeated every single time. Made once on Sunday, the 10 minutes is paid once and drawn on 5 or 6 times across the week. This is not meal prep in the Western sense of cooking 7 identical meals in advance. It is the preparation of components that can be recombined in different ways across the week. The same dashi becoming the base of a different soup each night, the same cooked rice becoming a different dish depending on what is added to it. The behavioral economics research on this is specific. Dr. Baba Shiv at Stanford has documented what is sometimes called decision depletion at the point of highest resistance, the finding that people are most likely to abandon a healthy intention at the specific moment when the effort required exceeds the willpower currently available, and that this moment reliably occurs in the early evening, after a day of decision-making has already depleted the reserve. The 6:40 p.m. refrigerator calculation described at the beginning of this video is decision depletion in its purest form. A person with reduced cognitive resources facing a decision that requires imagination, planning, and multiple sequential steps. The Sunday Foundation moves the highest effort decisions to the moment of the week when willpower is most available and stakes are lowest, so that the 6:40 p.m. version of the decision becomes simple assembly rather than complex creation. Dashi already made, rice already cooked, the evening decision reduced to what goes with what is already there. The person standing at the refrigerator on Wednesday evening is not being asked to plan a meal. They are being asked to combine 3 things that are already prepared. A decision small enough that the depleted willpower of a Wednesday evening can still make it. This is the habit I told you about at the beginning, the one that eliminates the single most expensive and most common failure point in a Western kitchen. Here is the mechanism. The single most reliable driver of both food waste and grocery overspending in Western households is the specialty ingredient, purchased for one specific recipe, used once, and then occupying refrigerator or pantry space until it expires, unused. The jar of a specific curry paste bought for a recipe tried once. The bottle of a specific vinegar. The bag of a specific grain purchased because a recipe called for it and never purchased again because the first bag is still, months later, half full. The USDA estimates that the average American household discards between 30 and 40% of its food supply, and research from the Natural Resources Defense Council has identified single-use specialty ingredients purchased for one recipe and never repurposed as one of the largest categories of that waste. Every specialty ingredient represents money spent on an item that will very likely be thrown away, and every recipe built around a specialty ingredient represents a decision that increases both cost and the probability of future waste. The Japanese pantry operates on a small, fixed set of core ingredients: soy sauce, miso, mirin, dashi components, rice vinegar, that appear across dozens of different dishes rather than each dish requiring its own dedicated ingredient. A single bottle of soy sauce might be used in 40 different meals across a month. A single jar of miso similarly. The ingredients are not chosen for any single recipe. They are chosen for their combinatorial range, how many different dishes they can contribute to. She has, by her own count, approximately 12 ingredients that form the base of nearly everything she cooks. Not 12 ingredients per meal, 12 ingredients total, recombined across the week in different ratios and different combinations, supplemented by whatever seasonal produce the market offered that week. Nothing purchased for one dish and abandoned afterward. Everything purchased for its range. A bottle of soy sauce that seasons a stir-fry on Monday, marinates fish on Wednesday, and flavors a soup on Friday is not a cheaper bottle of soy sauce than the one bought for a single Monday recipe. It is the same bottle, doing 3 jobs instead of 1, its cost divided by 3 uses, rather than carried entirely by a single meal. This single change, refusing to purchase an ingredient unless it will realistically be used in at least 3 different meals, is the one most people report as the single most impactful shift on this list, because it addresses both the money and the waste simultaneously, from the moment of purchase rather than after the fact. The 4th habit addresses the hidden costs that most home cooking advice never accounts for: cleanup time. Japanese home cooking is structured, wherever practical, around minimal equipment, a single pan, a single pot, a rice cooker running independently. Not because Japanese kitchens lack equipment, because the mental calculation of whether to cook includes, whether consciously or not, the anticipated cleanup, and a meal that generates 1 pan to wash is a meal that gets made on a tired evening in a way that a meal generating 4 pots, 2 cutting boards, and a food processor does not. A donburi, a rice bowl topped with a simmered or stir-fried protein and vegetable, is prepared almost entirely in a single pan. The rice cooker handling the rice independently, everything else cooked in sequence in the same skillet. The ingredients added in the order that lets each one finish at the right moment without ever requiring a second vessel. The technique is not a simplification of a more complex ideal. It is the ideal. The single pan is not a constraint apologized for. It is the design. Time-use research on home cooking, conducted by the Bureau of Labor Statistics' American Time Use Survey, has found that the average time spent on kitchen cleanup after a home-cooked meal in Western households is comparable to, or greater than, the time spent on the cooking itself. The meal that takes 25 minutes to cook and 20 minutes to clean up afterward has an effective time cost of 45 minutes, a figure that almost never appears in a recipe's stated preparation time, and that is precisely the hidden cost that drives people toward the 15-minute delivery app on a tired evening. A recipe advertising a 20-minute prep time that actually costs 45 minutes once cleanup is included is not lying, exactly. It is simply measuring the wrong thing. She cooks in 1 pan on most weeknights. Not because she is limited by her kitchen, but because the constraint produces a specific kind of simplicity. A meal that must work within 1 pan is a meal that has been forced to prioritize, to eliminate the unnecessary step, to work with what is genuinely required rather than what a recipe's aesthetic demanded. The 1-pan constraint is not a limitation on what can be cooked. It is a filter that removes the excess. The 5th habit is the one that turns the previous 4 into a system that survives an unpredictable week, rather than only working when everything goes according to plan. The Japanese freezer is not primarily for storing leftovers as an afterthought. It is treated as an active second pantry. Dashi frozen in portioned containers, cooked rice frozen in single-serving portions, seasonal vegetables blanched and frozen at the peak of their availability and cheapness, rather than purchased out of season later, at several times the price. The blanching itself is brief and specific. Vegetables dropped into boiling water for 1 to 3 minutes, depending on the type, then immediately transferred to ice water to halt the cooking process before they are drained and frozen. The brief heat deactivates the enzymes that would otherwise continue degrading flavor, color, and nutrients in the freezer over months, which is the specific mechanism that allows a properly blanched and frozen vegetable to retain its quality far longer than an unblanched one simply placed in a bag and frozen raw. The nutritional research on freezing is worth understanding because it contradicts a common assumption. A study published in the Journal of Food Science found that frozen vegetables, when frozen shortly after harvest at peak ripeness, retain nutritional content that is equal to or in some cases higher than fresh vegetables that have spent several days in transport and refrigerated storage before being purchased and eaten. The vegetable frozen at its nutritional peak in June is, by the time it reaches a plate in January, often more nutritious than the fresh, out-of-season vegetable purchased the same week. This reframes the freezer from a place where food goes to be forgotten into an active extension of the season buying principle from Habit 1. Buy the seasonal vegetable when it is cheapest and most nutritious, freeze the excess at that peak moment, and draw on it through the months when the same vegetable would otherwise cost several times more and offer considerably less nutritional value. The freezer is not storage. It is time-shifted shopping, executed at the optimal price and nutritional point. The same 20% extra bought in August at the peak of summer produce becoming January's vegetable, purchased at a fraction of January's price. The sixth habit is the one that makes the previous 5 sustainable, rather than another 5-item list of good intentions that survives for 3 weeks before quietly disappearing. In Japan, the preparation and consumption of tea, not a formal ceremony, simply the ordinary daily habit of stopping to make and drink tea, functions as a structural pause built into the day. It is not treated as optional, or as something to be skipped when busy. It is treated the way a scheduled meeting is treated, as a fixed point that the rest of the day organizes around, rather than a flexible activity that gets sacrificed to whatever else is competing for the time. Research on habit sustainability from Dr. Wendy Wood at the University of Southern California has found that the habits most likely to survive disruption, stress, and busy periods are the ones anchored to a specific, consistent, non-negotiable moment in the day, rather than the ones that depend on remaining willpower or motivation at the end of a long day. A habit that happens when there's time, competes with everything else for that time, and reliably loses. A habit that happens at a fixed point, regardless of how the rest of the day went, survives precisely because it was never up for negotiation. The tea time pause functions as this anchor for the entire kitchen system. It is the moment, several times a week, when the following week's shopping is considered, when the freezer inventory is mentally reviewed, when the small planning that habits 1 through 5 require actually happens, not as a separate task requiring separate willpower, but folded into a pause that was happening anyway. She does not have a system for meal planning in the sense of an app or a spreadsheet. She has tea several times a week, during which the planning happens as a natural extension of a pause she was taking regardless. The planning was never asked to compete for its own dedicated time and motivation. It was attached to something that already had both. 6 habits, none of them requiring more skill than most people already have. None of them requiring more time than most people already spend standing in front of an open refrigerator wondering what to do. Shun, buying what is in season, letting the produce determine the meal, rather than forcing the meal onto out-of-season produce. Cutting cost while increasing nutritional density at the same time. The Sunday Foundation, 20 minutes moving the highest effort decisions to the point in the week when willpower is most available, so the 6:40 p.m. decision becomes assembly rather than creation. The single-use ingredient ban, the one that most people report as the single most impactful change, because it addresses both waste and cost from the moment of purchase. The one-pan principle, accounting for the hidden cleanup costs that recipes never state, and using the constraint as a filter that removes unnecessary complexity. The freezer as a second pantry, time-shifted shopping at the nutritional and financial peak, extending the season buying principle across the entire year. And tea time as the non-negotiable pause, the anchor that makes the other 5 survive a busy week, rather than existing only in the imagined version of a life with more time. She spends 40 minutes planning, 20 minutes preparing, and less money than her colleagues spend on takeaway in a single week. The trade-off between time, money, and health was never actually fixed. It only looked fixed from inside a kitchen that had never been given the structure to prove otherwise. Tonight, before you go to bed, look at what is in your refrigerator and ask one question. Which of these ingredients could go into 3 different meals this week, and which was bought for one dish and is unlikely to be used again? That question, asked honestly, is the beginning of Habit 3, and Habit 3 is where most people tell me the shift actually starts. If this changed the way you think about your own kitchen, share it with someone who has been standing in front of their refrigerator at 6:40 in the evening, more nights than they would like to admit. They may not need to become a better cook. They may need a kitchen with better structure. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next one.